thing I want to talk about is dealing with dynamics, and now it's going to start to get a little bit more complicated. So let's start with the instrument that is probably simpler, the piano. We recall that piano's dynamics for MIDI instruments are controlled by velocity, and that's not going to change here. And if I double click either of the hands with my color set to velocity, I can see that coming in from note flight, velocities have come in with that MIDI file. I can also adjust them. And by the way, up here, I have a list of all of the available MIDI files. And if I click on the folder, I can choose to see the whole piano track. And I can even click on this button if I want to be able to adjust all of my MIDI notes for the piano at one time without having to toggle between the two. So that could be very helpful. I might decide to lift up some of these higher notes, and you can select multiple notes of chords. And when you do this, I think the easiest way to do is just hit Command or Alt on PC and drag up if we want to get that chord to be loud. Right? You see here, anytime I see those straight velocities, I'm tempted to just kind of highlight everything, even if I don't need to change it, hit my Humanize button. And here, I don't think I need to be extreme, like this is, if this is nothing, and also make sure I'm selected notes. I might just mess with them a little bit so that they're just not so kind of robotic. You could also mess with timing a little bit, all this kind of stuff to make it sound a little more human. Now let's look at the cello. That's familiar territory. The cello is complicated because we have two different sounds that we're using, and they actually work a little differently. And if you think about a cello, a long sustained note, well, the dynamic can change after the note is attacked, right? You could start very softly and get louder. You could start very loud and then, like a forte piano, come down and then grow. So it's unlike a piano or a drum or a guitar, which are all velocity-controlled instruments. It's going to have something else control its dynamics. But if you think about the Pitts notes, those are just single attacks. And so usually pizzicato notes are controlled by velocity, but sustained notes are not. So let's take a look at the cello. Now, cello, we've got two different sounds. I'm going to make sure I'm selecting the long sound. And when I click on this, I notice that there are velocities here for the long sounds. And let's just listen for a second. And I want to show you something. I'm going to take all of these and I'm going to drag them all the way up to 127. And now I'm going to drag them all the way down to 1. And it doesn't make a difference, right? So I'm surprised actually that Noteflight sent us this with velocity information, because what we're going to use to control sustained info on the cello is actually this fader, which corresponds to CC1, or Continuous Controller 1. If you've ever seen a keyboard with a mod wheel, that's the mod wheel. And very often, instruments that are sustaining instruments will use Continuous Controller 1 to determine dynamics, and we'll call that modulation. I was surprised in this track when I toggled from velocity to 1, the mod wheel, that there's nothing. right? There's nothing there. But if I were to begin to write in some dynamics like this, we're going to hear it. Right? And we can hear how detailed we can be. Now, here, the mod wheel is not actually going to do anything to the dynamics, right? And by the way, you can control this. So like I can go on to channel, I can be writing in channel 2 mod data, and you'll actually see a different color, right, for mod 2. But whether it's all the way up or, let me delete some of those marks and just pull this all the way down, or all the way down, it's not going to make a difference for those notes. For those notes, I am going to have to switch to controlling the velocities. Now, we've already adjusted those velocities a little bit, but let's take a look. It's the first control there. And by the way, you can toggle using M for modulation and V for velocity. So in this cello part, only for these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes, velocity is going to matter, right? And I can adjust them any which way I want on the instrument itself. And sometimes, you know, it's a very dynamic instrument, but if you go too low, you might lose it. So I'm keeping them all relatively loud. If I were to drag them all down, right, you can hear the change, right? We lose them. So soft, you almost can't hear. The moral of the story here is, number one, we're going to use modulation to control dynamics for instruments that are sustaining instruments very often. Not always. There's sometimes other parameters, other CC values we're going to use. But it's a safe first guess that modulation is what's going to do it. And oftentimes, things coming in from a notation program will have modulation data. I'm not 100% sure why that wasn't the case this time with NoteFlight. It should have known better. Okay, that's controlling dynamics on multiple MIDI instruments that use multiple different means of controlling the dynamics. And I'll see you at the next video.